It's all about truth. All of it. Every single thing. All boils down to the truth. We all want truth. The truth will set you free. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. This is Press for Truth Live. I'm your host, Dan Dix. Today is Tuesday, March the 8th, 2016, and what a week it has been for us here at Press for Truth. Things have been pretty crazy. We've essentially, in just 7 days, kind of gone full circle all around in regards to Canadians' rights being given to Canadians and then essentially taken away. It was literally 1 week ago today that we were sitting right here in this chair broadcasting on the good news that Canadians have earned the right to grow their own cannabis under the Allard versus the Queen case. This was a huge win for medical patients here in Canada to be able to produce their own medical cannabis. Such a big step in the right direction for the freedoms of individual Canadians here in Canada. And then fast forward just 3 days later, on Friday, March 4th, when in downtown Vancouver, there was an event taking place at the Railway Club where Augustus Invictus, who is our guest we're going to be speaking with a little later, as well as Richard Heathen is on the line, and we're going to be speaking with him as well. There was an event that was organized, and in case you haven't seen it yet, I was there to document this event where Lauren Southern also showed up and was intimidated, and we ended up being surrounded by a group of people from Antifa. This is a protest group who showed up to protest the event that Augustus was speaking at. And if you haven't seen the video, folks, we'll have a link in the description to where Lauren was engaged in a debate with some of these feminists and social justice warriors. And it descended into all-out assault by these people, dumping a bottle of pop, what later turned out to be actually urine mixed in with this, all over Lauren. And in fact, this story gained international attention. We have here an article out from Press for Truth pointing out some of the news that this made. Internationally, we see here from the National Post, activists accused of pouring bottle of urine on rebel reporter during anti-fascist rally in Vancouver. This is coverage from the National Post, where they did fairly good coverage here, and they pretty much they covered it, did a pretty well job at explaining what the situation was. Here's another one out from Breitbart. Libertarian commentator Lauren Southern assaulted by anti-fascist protesters. And again, Breitbart is on the money here. The encounter, which was recorded by Press for Truth and can be watched below, concluded when a protester sneaked up behind Southern and shockingly poured a bottle of liquid, which Southern later said she believed was urine, over the Libertarian commentator. A scuffle quickly broke out as two men attempted to restrain the protester, who was nonetheless able to flee the scene. Unfazed by the attack, Southern continued her broadcast, calmly fielding questions from Press for Truth just a few minutes after the incident. And of course, as we said, this essentially went viral, and all sorts of news agencies have been covering it. CTV News covered it on the 6 o'clock news, and we're going to show you a clip of that. But before we go to that clip, and before we get to our guest, I want to show you this article that's just out yesterday from Vice News. Now, get a load at what Vice has to say here. In the end, even without Invictus, a gaggle of protesters on both sides showed up. In the middle was right-wing online broadcaster Lauren Southern and a camera crew with the 9/11 truther website Press for Truth. Southern used this opportunity to argue that women frequently falsely report rape and that transgenderism is somehow debunked by science. No, actually, Vice News, that's not what Lauren was saying whatsoever. She said in the video that she recognizes that there are transgendered people. That's not what this was about whatsoever. In fact, the article goes on here as another little footnote. Somewhere in the small argument, a protester dumped a water bottle of what was later discovered to be urine on Southern's head, like as if that was some sort of a side note to mention. But get a load of the title of this article. The title of this article coming from Vice News is, in regards to our guest, Augustus Invictus, this goat blood-drinking pagan running to replace Rubio isn't welcome in Canada. Now, if that's not a clickbait title, if I've ever seen one, I mean, Vice is just being ridiculous here. And in fact, some of you may be watching this and wondering, you know, Dan, I thought you were a Christian. You know, why are you having this pagan, goat blood-drinking, ritualistic libertarian on your show? Well, today's show, ladies and gentlemen, is not about what I believe in. It's not about what Augustus Invictus believes in. We're not here today to talk about our political ideologies or our leanings in that way. Today's show is about freedom of speech and the right to be able to talk about the things that you believe in without being silenced by the government or any other faction of protesters or what have you. This show is all about free speech today, ladies and gentlemen. So I want to show you this clip from CTV News in case you missed it. And when we come back from the clip, we're going to be joined on the line by who's being called one of the most dangerous libertarians in the United States, Augustus Invictus. But here's a clip from CTV where they did some pretty good coverage of what transpired just the other night. And when we get back from the clip, we'll be joined on the line by our guest, Augustus Invictus.
Sorry guys, there's only two genders, female and male.
You know what? I'm finding a lot of what you're saying extremely offensive.
This right here is just part of what led up to the attack. Lauren Southern, a libertarian commentator, getting into a heated argument with demonstrators about gender identity and rape culture on Granville Street Friday night. Then this happened.
There are a lot of
Witnesses say a person came out of nowhere and poured what's believed to be urine on Southern. A scuffle then broke out, but the culprit ended up getting away.
I was really shocked. I just feel something come rushing down my face and I hear screaming, and there has been a bottle of what I didn't know what it was, and it's something poured all over me.
So far, no word whether police are investigating this as an assault.
That definitely was an assault, and I don't know if you guys could hear the war cry, the rally cry of the other women there in support of what that girl just did to Lauren. Just despicable behavior. And joining us now on the line is the man of the hour, the guy who's all this is stemming around, Augustus Invictus. Augustus, man, first of all, thank you for taking the time to join us here today on Press for Truth.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me.
Now, this is a very, very interesting case. I want to get your thoughts on what occurred here with these Antifa protesters showing up to counter the meeting of these libertarians. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about what just happened to you just last week when you were trying to get in to Canada. You were stopped at the border, and this is what was handed to you. It's a document that says, allowed to leave Canada pursuant to paragraph 42 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations. I am allowing you to withdraw your application to enter Canada and to leave Canada without delay. So, first of all, notice the language there. They are saying they're going to allow you to leave Canada. How did this start for you when you got to the border? Give us your side of the story. What did these security border agents say to you?
Well, first of all, yeah, they're all connected. It's not as though my denial into Canada was a separate event from what happened to Miss Southern. But man, where to begin? So the 42 you're talking about, what they cited to kick me out of the country, That's their way of saying that I'm a danger to the security of Canada. That's how they justified what they did. So, man, where to begin on what their justification was? It was mostly because of allegations that I was a neo-Nazi. And when I had intelligence reports from the Canadian Border Services, it turned out that in their report, they wrote that their source for all of this was the Vancouver Antifa. They actually got the information about me being a racist and a neo-Nazi and a fascist from the Antifa themselves. They actually cited that in the report. And these are the same people that poured the urine on Lauren. So, I mean, I guess my side of the story is basically I drove up to the Canadian border, said I was there to make a speech. The guard at the crossing did not believe me, so he had me pull over. Because, you know, what American politician is going to make a speech in Canada? That's ridiculous. So when I pulled over, they began an investigation. And that turned into a 3.5-hour investigation, at the end of which, for about 30 to 45 minutes, they interrogated me about my connections with neo-Nazis, specifically the American Front, about the allegations of racism and fascism that the Antifa themselves had put out there. They actually made me take off my shirt so that they could search for neo-Nazi symbols in my tattoos. They asked me about my ex-wife. Apparently from the same report I got on what had happened, they had also gone through all my texts and emails in my phone. In their report is stuff about my girlfriend, just really invasive stuff. And you know, they never got me on hate speech. This whole interrogation was about me being a neo-Nazi. They were trying to get me to admit that I was one. And when they couldn't do that, I guess they just said I was a non-genuine visitor. I didn't have a real purpose for being there. There was no real speech, even though they knew there was because they looked it up on the internet. They said I had no speech prepared, which was false because I told them what the speech was about. Everything about it was just fishy, and it was clear that it was all for political reasons, and they were going 100% on what the Antifa had charged.
So really then, this story essentially starts a little bit further back than, I guess, last week. I suppose it starts a few weeks ago when you were scheduled to speak at the Railway Club. And so it was this group of protesters, Antifa, who was the ones responsible for giving this report, which they used in order to block you from coming into the country. So it's the anti-fascists the allegedly anti-fascists who blocked you essentially from coming in here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they had been doing that all along. They didn't just block me from coming in the country. I mean, originally, like you said, we were scheduled to speak at the Railway Club, which is right in downtown Vancouver. We're going to have a private event. I was going to speak inside, and that was all fine. And then the anti-fascists found out about it, and they decided to start calling the bar and harassing them and telling them, oh, there's these white supremacists, these fascists meeting in your establishment, and if you don't cancel this event, it's going to be bad for business. And this had gone on for a while. I mean, it was a solid week, I think, and Richard can give you a better estimate of it, but they had written before saying they were concerned about these Antifa and what they were saying, but it took a while for them to finally say, okay, we're not going to have this event here. So they did call and harass them for quite a while before they finally canceled it. Mm-hmm. And that's when I decided that we needed to have this speech right outside the Railway Club, because someone had to show them what it meant to stand up for themselves. You know, someone had to make the statement that you don't cower to communists. You got to stand up and you know, fight for your right to free speech, even if it meant standing in the street and saying what you had to say. Mm-hmm. So they did have the event canceled. Did not cross my mind they could have me denied from the country. I didn't think the Canadian government would bend over backwards to accommodate communists, but apparently I misjudged that situation.
Yeah, well, I never could have foreseen such a thing either. And then the plan was, as you said, to continue with the talk outside. This didn't stop the protesters and the Antifa group from showing up. Now, this, of course, was all organized by Richard Heathen, and I want to get him on the line so he can break it down for us, what it was like organizing this event, having it shut down. But before we bring Richard on the line, I want to cut to a clip of a video that we just released where, Richard is dealing with some of these communist social justice warriors and trying to point out how what they are in fact doing is more fascist than anything that they are worried about Augustus Invictus doing. So I want to cut here to a clip from just last week of Richard Heathen dealing with some of these guys. And when we come back from the clip, we'll be joined on the line by both Richard and Augustus to talk about all this. Here is Richard Heathen dealing with the communist SJWs.
I think Antifa are a bunch of violent cowards. They say they're anti-fascist, but I don't think they've taken the fucking time to understand what fascism actually is, what the ideology actually is. I'm making a film about the possible fascist rise in response to far-left extremism, because fascism always comes from a reaction to the left. Look at Mussolini, look at Hitler, look at history. It always comes as an extreme pullback from the left. And if fascism is to rise, it will be as a reaction to the far left. They said they own the streets, that we will smash the teeth in of fascists, but they don't even understand what that term means. They use it loosely to apply to anyone who they think has an authoritarian tendency that they don't agree with. But when it comes to economic liberty, when it comes to initiating force against people, these people, I'll tell you what, these people are actually closer to actual fascists than Augustus Invictus is, because one of the tenets of fascism is to use violence to further your political agenda, and to hold an ideology of therapeutic violence. And a lot of the people who are at least talking online were very open about the need to smash, about how violence is good, and that the lack of violence, or the failure to embrace violence was a failure of their movements.
Meanwhile, it seems order out of chaos is really the plan all along. When you can generate that madness, you can offer the solutions out of that, which is always more power to the state, isn't it?
Of course, it's funny. These people think they're anti-establishment, but their ideologies, their far left-wing ideologies, are pushed in the universities. They're funded by the big foundations. They are pushing global authoritarianism. I call them the collectivist hordes of the New World Order, because that's really what they are. They will bring in the thought police. They will enable people to enable the state by calling for it, but to shut down the speech of people they don't like, because, oh my God, this guy's a neo-Nazi. Oh my God, this guy's evil. They are the foot soldiers that will bring in cultural authoritarianism.
Did Mussolini not invade Africa to enslave the African people?
Fascism is inherently imperialistic. I'm not defending it, but I'm trying to...
Are you a fascist?
No, I'm a libertarian.
Why are you here defending fascists then?
Because Augustus Invictus isn't a fascist.
Oh, he's not. Why does he use the eagle and the fascist?
Because those are Roman symbols. I asked him. I actually did an interview with him because I asked him about that. Those are Roman symbols. Liberty didn't come all at once. You ahistorical moron. The thing is, they came in increments. It came in incrementally.
So first for white people, then for all the rest, right?
It was coming in increments.
First for white males, then for other males, then for women. It didn't happen all at once, brother.
I don't see the freedom in the United States when they murder black people. Where's the freedom for them?
You're an idiot.
Right now, they still murder blacks in the United States. Where's the freedom?
Oh, bullshit. Communism alone has killed over 100 million in the 20th century alone. But yeah, let's try it again, because this time it'll really work.
Wow. Yeah. What an idiot indeed. I'm pretty sure Heathen just schooled that young commie there. And joining us now on the line is Richard Heathen, and we have Richard and Augustus on together. Richard, first of all, thanks for joining us. What was that like for you, having to have that kind of intellectual debate with somebody like that? And what does it say to you about the state of free speech here in Canada?
Well, they think, they say, well, free speech only applies to the government shutting down your speech, but it also applies to having other people threaten violence against you for your speech. Now, I was pretty amped up there because what a lot of people may or may not know is the Antifas were threatening violence. They were coming in. We seen the masked men. They were trying to surround us for a bit. Then some of our group were, kind of getting in their face, but take off your masks, take off your masks. And they seen there was a large contingent with cameras, so it's not opportunistic for them if everyone has cameras when they were planning violence. So I was pretty amped up there, but they don't even understand their own ideologies and the ideologies of what they are supposed to be against, right? They don't even understand the actual tenets of fascism. To them, fascism is simply a right-wing movement that goes against something that they don't like. It's an abstract term which they can apply to all of their political opposition.
Yeah, exactly. They seem to be confused here about just what fascism is, and I think you were trying to essentially point out to them that, guys, look, what you are doing is more fascist than anything that you think may be going on here. And, you pointed it out to the one guy. You said, oh, look at all of us racists. Look how racist we are over here hanging out. We're clearly a bunch of racists. I think you kind of put him in his place there. Augustus, I mean, what did you think of the exchange that you witnessed there between Richard and some of these intellectual nut jobs?
Yeah, I think it's typical, right? I mean, you said it was an intellectual debate. I would strongly disagree.
Yeah.
Because they say, well, what are you doing here if you're a libertarian defending a fascist like Invictus? And Richard's like, well, because he's not a fascist. I've interviewed him. I've spoken with him. I know his positions. He's a libertarian. He says, well, then why does he use the eagle in the fasces? And Richard says, those are historical symbols. They come from ancient Rome. And he says, well, then why do cops in the U.S. murder black people? They're typical red herrings. They are textbook logical fallacies. He can't even keep up with Richard's conversation. Yeah. He keeps throwing accusations at Richard. Richard responds with logic. And of course, what do? They shift it up. They try to reframe the debate because they know they've lost. Mm-hmm. That's actually a common tactic of the left. They know that you don't actually have to answer questions. You don't have to respond logically. You respond with emotion and you try to reframe it so that the person can't argue with you on a logical level. And that's what that guy was trying to do, but he did a piss poor job of it. Mm-hmm. So what do I think of it? I think you got to punch people like that in the face. There's no reasoning with them.
Richard, where do you think a lot of this is stemming from? Because it seems that the universities these days are churning out these politically correct social justice warrior imbeciles. I mean, I think we were all we all became aware of this when that Yale student around 5-6 months ago, around the time of Halloween, was complaining about their safe spaces being violated for these inappropriate costumes. But where in your mind is this stemming from, and more importantly, where's it going?
Well, it obviously comes from the universities. The big foundations have been funding left-wing egalitarian movements since at least the 70s. The Rockefeller and Ford Foundation funded the first women's studies, or basically feminist courses. So it's been a march through the institutions that's been funded by the big foundations, and they've got a hold in society. They've got legitimacy because they're in the university, and now that they've had like 40, 50, 60 years in the universities, the ideology is now self-perpetuating because in order to hold a significant position in society, you need to go to university, and in order to go to university, you get indoctrinated into this worldview, this ideology, and so at this point it's self-perpetuating. So now you've got people in high-level positions of power who have been indoctrinated and beat into this cosmopolitan, egalitarian worldview. And so at this point, it's going to just intensify now because the Marxists in the university are much more. They can be much more open with their ideas and their agenda now. So it's just going to intensify until I think we're going to see either a ridiculous collectivist takeover such as Brave New World, or it's going to create a backlash, which I think is more likely. There's going to be a reactionary backlash, which is going to end in some sort of conflict. I think it could very well be an armed conflict. I'm hoping it's just a battle of ideas, but But if you have the state continuing to push this agenda and punish people who are against it, eventually it's going to explode in violence.
Yeah. Well, where do you guys see feminism coming into the picture? Because, I mean, it ended up being a big part of the story of what took place there. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with some of these things that are happening to you, Augustus, have been happening to some people who give dating seminars. There's a couple of people. There's that Roosh guy, for instance,
Right.
who's scheduled to speak in Toronto, scheduled to speak in Vancouver. In Toronto, actually, the Toronto female boxing team threatened to show up and physically beat this guy up, and he had to cancel.
I heard about that.
Yeah, he had to cancel his tours, and the feminists are getting violent and are the ones who are getting aggressive here. What are your thoughts on how that movement is kind of tying in with the social justice warriors?
Well, I mean, where to begin with feminism? You know, I have mixed feelings on it. I've always thought that radical view that women are equal to men, so I've never had any violent reaction against it. It's the feminists themselves who seem to draw lines in the sand and say, well, if you don't agree with this ideology or that, then you are a sexist, chauvinist, pig, and you deserve to be beat up by the women's boxing team. So I think that whole movement is kind of odd. I don't have any real say in it. I've never thought of it as my fight. And I think it's kind of strange that they show up and they mob Lauren Southern and talk to her about gender issues, because my speech that day was on the common struggle of Canadians and Americans as Westerners. It had nothing to do with feminism whatsoever. And so they show up picking a fight about it. And I think it's because it's really easy to say, well, if you don't believe in gender equality, then you're an inhuman monster. Same thing as if you show up and say, well, if you don't believe in racial equality, then obviously you're not even human. You're backwards barbarian. So it's just one of those issues where people can show up, pick a fight about topic A, B, or C, and if you're on the wrong side of that, you deserve to have urine poured all over you. So I don't know. I don't know what to think about that. It's just a little insane.
Yeah, what do you think, Richard? Were they just showing up for a fight or what?
Well, no, it's intersectionality. You see, all these ideologies are tied. It's all
with cultural Marxism.
Yes, cultural Marxism. But let me backtrack a little bit. Why they were so offended is because, at the end of the day, these feminism has second, third wave feminism is basically Marxist. They take the same Marxist worldview and apply it to gender. Now they're mad because they think Augustus is some sort of white supremacist, and white supremacy ties in with heteropatriarchy intersectionally with what they call the cis white hetero capitalist patriarchy. Basically, the whole system created by the Western world is this giant machine of oppression that beats down on women, minorities, anyone who they perceive can have a marginalized status. It's this engine, this giant
conspiracy. What about pagans?
Yeah, I don't think you have victim status, Augustus. Sorry, bud.
That's not fair.
And I think Lauren took the high ground and did the right thing by not playing the victim card after the fact and just saying, look, I could whine and complain, but all I had to do really was go home and take a shower. And that's kind of putting these girls in their place again. I mean, what do you think about Lauren's response there to that?
I think it was amazing, honestly, and I think it shows the feminine virtue of grace that a lot of people have forgotten, like Ave Maria. Because I told everybody that was organizing the speech, because it was warned, look, these Antifa, they throw feces, they throw Ziploc bags of urine, and my response was, look, guys, if anybody throws a bag of urine at me, I will consider the non-aggression pact gone. I will respond with violence. I can guarantee you that 100%. But Lauren just took it fair and square, and she showed real grace, and I thought it was amazing. I could not have done that myself, so I commend her for that.
Well, I suppose they essentially would have been the ones first violating the non-aggression principle by doing this in the first place. So Lauren would have been right in defending herself.
Meanwhile, I agree.
Right. So Meanwhile, Richard and another guy, Dan, kind of jumped to the aid of Lauren, really, because this person had essentially just came in from nowhere and attacked Lauren, and they managed to get away. But what was that like for you, Richard? I mean, it's in the heat of the moment. It's a bit of a tussle. I think he did the right thing, by trying to grab this assaulter, this person who was trying to flee the scene of the crime. But for the interest of Lauren's safety, tried to grab him, but they left. Well,
I seen Dan try and deal with the initial attacker, and then it looked like 2 or 3 people were hitting him. So I just grabbed it and pulled someone off of him. And then I saw what looked like a man with a weapon hitting people with it, and I tried to grab and disarm it, and then somebody put me in a headlock, and I was able to squirm out of it. Mm-hmm. So it was, and then everything kind of chilled out a little bit, but that was, it was a little, it was interesting at least. I was kind of amped. I was expecting, because of all the threats, that there might be some violence, but that really was the least of what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm. And as Lauren pointed out, if you were just an observer across the street and you saw the group of libertarians and then you saw the other group who are doing the things that they were doing, which one are you going to think are the neo-Nazi, fascist, dangerous ones? I think it was pretty obvious which ones we had to be worried about there, not so much the libertarian crowd. So I guess this brings us to, it all boils down to free speech. And I want to, get your thoughts on where do we go from here and how do we challenge these things? I know that Lauren, actually, this may be a good time to bring up the fact that Lauren is launching something called the Triggering. And I believe this is going to be taking place tomorrow on Twitter. And the idea is to say as many offensive things that you can say. Use the hashtag the triggering, use the hashtag Lauren Southern, and say as many offensive things as you can say in the name of standing up for free speech. And I think it's going to rustle some feathers. Have you guys heard of this campaign, and what are your thoughts? Richard?
I haven't heard of it, but I'm all over that. I will hashtag the hell out of that. That sounds awesome.
Richard,
yeah, I've heard of it. I think it's the second one that they've done, but I think it's a good idea. We need to push the envelope, because if we, especially now when free expression is under attack, we have to be more bold with it as a defensive measure.
Yeah, it is clearly really, really under attack. I mean, to the point where Lauren Southern's getting piss poured all over her for simply saying there are 2 biological genders, and Augustus Invictus not being allowed into the country because some Antifa social justice warriors suggested that he was a neo-Nazi. Unbelievable state of affairs that we've come this far. And like I said, guys, just last week we won a huge case here in Canada, giving the rights to Canadians to grow their own cannabis, and then a few days later we have Canadians violating the right of other Canadians. So it's a sad state of affairs. And as you said, Richard, it's stemming from the universities. So perhaps that's where we ought to focus on bringing this back around. What do you think are some of the things moving forward here in the next, few months in order to get us back on track for proper freedom of speech here in Canada? What are the steps that we need to take? I know, Richard, you're making a film. I think that's a really important step that you can take to raise awareness about these issues. What are some of the things people can do? And tell us a little bit about the film that people can expect from you.
Well, right now we just have to kind of fight the narrative. And you know what? As a libertarian, I don't believe in calling the cops on people. I don't believe in using state violence. But again, we need to use any tactic we can against them. If they become violent, we need to use whatever measures we can against them, and if that includes calling the cops, then so be it. Because we're at, this is a silent ideological war, and if they think that they can attack us with impunity, if they can do whatever they want without any sort of consequences, it's only going to embolden them. So we have to, one way or the other, we have to take the fight to them. The film I'm making enough, it was about a fascistic backlash, because fascism actually does come as a reaction to the left. Now, this reaction to the left is coming regardless or not. I think that we as libertarians should embrace it and make it our own instead of pushing back the tide of history. Ride the wave of history. Use the momentum of what's happening to our advantage. Because as we pointed out earlier, this whole thing with the event in Vancouver and the violence, I think has really been a blow to the legitimacy of the left anti-fascists and their tactics and their movement as a whole. Now people can see that they poured urine on an innocent girl, a female. People have more sympathy towards violence to females than males. It's just human nature. So I think we should use that. We need to become more organized, more sophisticated in using the media. And I think this is why this is great. This show is great. This, highlighting this. So I think these are really great steps. And yeah, I think that's really we need to do. We need to work as hard as we can at delegitimizing the movements of the left and on one hand, and then debunking their philosophy on the other.
Well said. I mean, continue to expose it for what it is. Augustus, for you, what moving forward, what are your plans? Are you going to continue with the speaking tour despite the threats of violence? And what are your plans moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely, man. The Canadian Border Services asked me about the assassination threats, and they said, well, did you call the cops? And I said, no. Of course not. Like Richard said, I'm a libertarian. I don't call the cops on people. That's just not my MO. And they just could not understand that. Like, well, aren't you worried? And I said, well, I wouldn't use the word worried. I'm prepared. I know it's coming, and I'm going to respond. But no, I'm not worried. I mean, this is the line of work I'm in. You get death threats. I get death threats all the time. And you just have to prepare for it in heart. So, yeah, I'm going to keep going on. I'm not going to be intimidated by it. I don't know about up there in Canada because you guys don't have the same sort of firearm laws we have. But here in the South, at least, if this ever happened where I am down here, they would all be put in the ground. They would all be dead. They know better than to try to pour urine on people, attack people, mob people like they did to us in Portland. There were 20 people that came to mob me and one woman that I waited behind to get her on the bus. And I take 20 people who are armed against one person as a death threat. So if that ever happens to me, my plan is to mow them all down, quite honestly. I mean, I do see the virtue in just showing what their tactics are. But I think they've already outed themselves enough on that. And I think a very important point is for everybody to wake up to the fact that the left does not give a damn about freedom of speech. And they are naked at this point, just balls out, just bare naked truth that they don't care about freedom of speech. They care about safety and they care about tolerance. And they are willing to shut down, even with violence and harassment and intimidation, free speech events because it doesn't jive with their message. Because it might offend people. And they admit that quite openly. So I think it's time for people to realize this is not a battle where we can just talk them out of things. It's a battle where you have to be willing and able to respond to force with force. And so that is my plan from this point forward.
Well, I know, personally, as a Canadian, we tend to just kind of say, "Hey, sorry, eh?" But
yeah.
Well,
same with the allowed to leave Canada. They gave me that form saying you are allowed to leave, and that's the very polite, nice Canadian way of saying get the hell out of my country. It's just different worlds.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Different worlds indeed. So, Richard and Augustus, Richard first, where give us the links for people who want to learn more from you and are going to be interested in seeing your film. Where can people go to learn more from you?
Well, you can find me on my website, libertymachinenews.com. You can find me on my Facebook. There's a Facebook page for Liberty Machine News, facebook.com/Liberty Machine. I'm on Twitter at Richard Heathen. And yeah, that's where you can find me. There's links to my YouTube channel. You can find it at, you just Google my first film, Hidden Influence, The Rise of Collectivism, which covers how the foundations funded the rise of authoritarian collectivist, specifically left-wing collectivist ideologies in the education system.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really look forward to seeing what you've come out with, and we're going to have links in the description. So I want to thank our guests. We'll also have links to Augustus's site, invictusforsenate.com. So Augustus and Richard, both of you guys, thank you very much for coming on to speak with us today.
Sure, man. Thank you for having us, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
All right, so that was Richard Heathen and Augustus Invictus, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to have links to the videos in the description so you can see just what took place for yourself. Unbelievable, again, just to wrap this up, of how we've come from just last week winning some rights for Canadians to having them completely stripped in regards to free speech. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Take part in the triggering tomorrow if you're interested. If you are on Twitter, you can check that out. Also, check the links in the description to where you can support this show. We need your support. You can do that at patreon.com, where we have a Patreon page set up for Press for Truth. And it's without your support, we can't continue to do this show. So please check the links in the description. And that is all for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you right back here, same time, same place, same channel. Until then, keep fighting the good fight, my friends.